see a growing room full of people, quietly growing room full of people. Anyway, I'll be playing 2 pieces. Actually, I'm going to play 3 today, but 2 of them are together. I'm going to begin with Mozart, and then I'll move later to some very lovely pieces by Brahms. The Brahms pieces later are 2 intermezzos. These are pieces I have played here before. There's so much great music, and I often repeat it because I've played so frequently for you. And these are I just think beautiful, solid, great pieces of classical music. The 2 intermezzos kind of have one that's extremely energetic, then kind of sets up the second one, and it'll end with a slow piece. So the whole thing today, I will be ending with a very lovely, beautiful, slow piece by Johannes Brahms, the great German composer who wrote wonderful, wonderful pieces, small pieces for piano that are like gems, as my teacher used to say. They're a book full of just gems of pianos. But I'd like to begin with another wonderful piece by Mozart. He wrote some fantasies for piano, what he called fantasies. He wrote 3 of them, actually. I've played a couple of them here. This is the one in C minor. And a fantasy, again, is very much like the word says. It's something kind of that's born of the imagination and then seems to go where it wants to go. It's not necessarily having quite the typical structure of certain other song-like pieces or other kinds of things, like a ballad has a story, and you can almost hear the building of that story. The fantasy is freer. So this piece, actually, it's almost as if it has several movements in it, but you won't really know that or feel that because they're woven together and they flow amongst each other, into each other, and then things come back. So it has kind of a whole arc and comes back and brings back the beginning. So it's dramatic that way. Mozart, I think, is a dramatic composer. He wrote dramatic operas. You can think of him maybe as light or something like that. He's not. He's deep and can be intense and kind of startling in a way. So this is the Mozart fantasy. And again, it will be like one singular work coming all the way back around.
us his reflections on a busy summer for the American Ethical Union. We pondered the future of our movement and tried to answer the question, whither goes ethical culture? Hugh.
Thanks, Mike. Welcome, everybody. For people here the first time, I apologize for a little in-house talk, but you can catch up on that later. Hopefully this will offer a broad enough sort of explanation. So, welcome to our first in-person meeting of the fall 2023 season. Let's warm it up a little bit. I hope you had some time to rest and recreate and rejuvenate and perhaps even do a little bit of socializing this summer. I did, and I'm deeply grateful for that. I spent time with my family and got caught up on my reading. I particularly enjoyed the works of Bell Hooks, Janine Cummings, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Miriam Toews. But I was most impressed actually by a book by Sarah Bakewell about the history of humanism, and I'll be sharing more about our book discussions soon about those books. But I did spend some significant time this summer doing ethical culture work, especially in June and July. I had planned Peace Day Philly events. Look in the newsletter about those coming up in 2 weeks. I did work with Mike and Cheryl to set the stage for an ethics podcast out of this building. You'll find out more about that in a little bit. And what took the most time, though, was participating in the American Ethical Union's work over the summer. It's our federating organization. It was about the future of ethical culture. Now, I participated in Zoom meetings, I was reading long email chains, and I went to the AEU business meeting on July 29th. So today I want to go back and express a little bit more gratitude first, and then I'm going to share a little bit about what draws me to ethical culture before going into what concerns me about our movement, and then I'll conclude generally some comments about the future of ethical culture. And it'll be too general for some of you and too specific for others, so hopefully in the middle somewhere. So let me start with gratitude, though. I deeply appreciated the time and energy that the AEU board and staff put into the work this summer. Our national organization has been under a great deal of pressure recently, in fact, for that past half century. I'll say why more in a second. But the board and the staff of the organization deserves a lot of praise for helping our unique tradition look to the future and figure out how we can flourish. I'm also very grateful to the PES board for their investment of time and energy over the summer, not only keeping this building operating, but also preparing for the fall and attending these American Ethical Union meetings. Hold your applause for a minute, because I want to call out some people for thanks. Would the PES board members present please stand up or wave to everybody? They include Michael Black-Smith, Kate Esposito, Dan Hoffman, Nick Sanders, Stan Horowitz, Henry Pashkow, Sally Redlener, Drew Snyder, and Sylvia Metzler. Did I get everybody? There's some hands. Okay, I'm gonna make sure I didn't leave anybody out. And some put in particularly a lot of time with the American Ethical Union. Mike, thank you, and for others, Dan and others, thank you for that. I also want to thank those who work as staff here, Cheryl, Oliver Jane, Greg, for keeping the building operating over the summer, and for the committee members and task force members and chairs for the work they do. So everybody that I've mentioned so far, the board, the staff, the task force members, committee members, please raise your hand high. Raise your hand high now, look at that, okay? There you go. This is what it takes to keep this place, so thank you. Thank you again. And Camp Linden, yes. Well, that's a committee. I meant them under the umbrella. And especially given the fact that have you caught your breath yet, Sharon and Leonard?
Yeah, we were in D.C. for 2 weeks.
Okay.
For 4 days, we were like, totally out of it.
Yeah. Our Camp Linden program.
We survived.
Good, excellent. Thank you for that good work. And to conclude the gratitude, I just want to send out gratitude for Felix Adler, the guy who founded our humanist tradition here in the United States in 1876, a long time ago, and we're still here. For those without a traditional faith belief, Adler offers us a way to build a meaningful life in an often challenging world. So, one deep breath of gratitude. So what is it that draws me to ethical culture? I want to say this briefly because this is how I'm approaching the work that we're doing. Adler founded ethical culture explicitly to address what he called the spiritual needs of our species. He didn't use the term spiritual to imply a ghostly presence or some reality outside of the physical world. He was not encouraging supernatural beliefs. What he called spiritual needs were deeply psychological and interpersonal in nature. While personally I'm a pretty strict metaphysical materialist, which means I basically think that reality is firmly rooted in the physical world, the term spiritual needs resonates with me for some reason, as well as the terms that ethical culture leaders Mary Herman and Joan Lewis use. They use the terms spiritual hunger and spiritual yearnings. This hunger, these yearnings, relate to the human quest for meaning, for belonging and connection to each other, and for fairness and justice in the world. And at times, like the present, when meaning, belonging, and justice seem to be being squeezed out by nihilism and alienation and greed, it's important that we rejuvenate ethical culture. The world needs this. Now, Don Matania, who was the ethical culture leader of the Washington Ethical Society for more than 3 decades, always stressed what he saw as Felix Adler's religious response to this hunger, to these yearnings. Now, not all of you are comfortable with the term religion to describe ethical culture, and I get and accept that. But if you're interested, you can hear a talk Don gave just a couple of weeks ago to the Ethical Humanist Society of Asheville, actually, where you were, Julia. You email me, I'll send you the link to that talk, because there's a lot of that I'm reflecting here. Bottom line, I am deeply grateful for ethical culture being a part of my life. And I want to share it with others, and I want to share it with future generations, because I think our future depends on it. But, given some trends, I do wonder, whither goes ethical culture? Will there be ethical culture in the future? Here are my concerns. Don Montagna was one of the first people I heard express his reservations about the future of ethical culture. When I joined the Washington Ethical Society, Don spoke about how our national membership had been declining from a high of over 5,000 people nationally in the 50s to about 2,000 today, less than 2,000. Now, Don believes that ethical culture declined when it began associating itself or identifying itself with secular humanism in the 60s. We lost what Don believed was our profound and unique religious approach, approach which responds to the profound and unique religious perspectives, a perspective which develops a belief that we spell God with 2 O's, right? A belief that responded to deep human needs by treating ethical goodness with the same reverence that traditional religions directed towards a mythical man-god in the sky. That goodness is what develops reverence within us. Now, unfortunately, Don argued that we're evolved, he believes, into more of a secular civic group, competing in a crowded field of other secular groups. So we've been watered down, he believes. Now, I'm not as convinced as Don that that is the dominant reason for our decline, but I think it might be involved. Because there's so many other trends. One of the most quoted books in this movement is Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, which he wrote about 30 years ago, and it talks about the fact that many Americans are becoming more independent and more isolated from each other, and so they're less likely to join any congregation, including ethical culture. Now, contributing to this, I believe, is a growing resistance, especially among my children's generation, in their 20s, 30s, to membership that feels tribal. Tribalism emphasizes membership in one group by making other groups the other. Tribalism divides to create a sense of belonging. This exclusivity is something that many younger people feel is a problem in the world. They see things that are sectarian or cliquish about congregations. I believe they're more interested in more fluid groups, groups that are connected via social media, that participate in activities, but don't demand as much attention given to one specific community. For activists who might find ethical culture's beliefs appealing, they don't seem as attracted to our congregational format. So despite a yearning to belong, for many, the appeal of traditional congregational life seems to be waning. And years of COVID isolation, I think, has made that more profound. Throw into that a growing trend towards social intolerance and political extremism that we see everywhere around us. Now, members of ethical societies tend to call out and condemn extremism and intolerance, but I do wonder whether these tendencies are seeping into the way we interact more often. Institutions and individuals have, I wonder, have they been drawn to more of a sense of certainty, righteous certainty, about their own beliefs, rather than a healthy curiosity about the beliefs of others, which I think I try to nurture myself, but I find that difficult sometimes. So I wonder whether we have to strive for balance between the demands of justice and the desire for inclusion to find ourselves a better balance, because I think it's difficult to try to do both of those things, to demand justice in the world and to welcome everything and everybody in. Because instead of engaging in productive dialogues in society or even in ethical culture, we find ourselves stuck in uncomfortable, divisive debates. However we move forward, we're going to have to do better, I think, at constructing constructive discussions about difference, whether it's gender or orientation, race or ethnicity or financial privilege. Whatever those are, those conversations need to happen, and they need to be more constructive. But whatever forces are at play, whether it's our loss of religious purpose that Don saw, or whether it's the bowling alone trend, or the intolerance, ethical culture membership in this country has been shrinking for half a century. And with fewer resources available, human and financial resources, the time and energy necessary to maintain programs in our communities have to be given by fewer and fewer people. And this contributes to burnout, frustration, ineffective processes for dealing with conflict, disappointment in the quality of programs and services offered. And this is true at our national level and in many ethical societies. And it's led some people to feel heartbroken. And as a result, some folks have left the ethical culture movement, and we don't always have the time or energy or courage to ask them why. Now, fortunately, more people are speaking out about this issue and these problems. We're beginning to understand that our dedication to ethical culture does not make us immune to boundary violations or bullying or toxic relationships that can accrue. Good people can fall into these things. Good people can sometimes wield power over people rather than building power with people. This humbling admission, thankfully, has led us to a point where we're considering on the national level some significant organizational changes. There were many governance proposals offered at the July 28th business meeting for our national organization, from the Washington Ethical Society, New York, Susquehanna Valley, Northern Virginia, Bergen, St. Louis, and a basket full of bylaw changes. And they were fun to read, were offered by people suggesting new ways to do business. And things got a little heated as the debates were going on. Fortunately, on the 29th of July, that meeting went really pretty well without a lot of rancor, but there was some deep disappointment and some great excitement because people felt either their voices weren't heard or their views didn't win out. But I think that this is typical of any organization where people pour in their time and energy. People are deeply invested in ethical culture, who are in ethical culture. So it hurts when they feel like things aren't working the way they feel they should. And I wonder sometimes whether or not the discussion of bylaws is a way to avoid more profound philosophical disagreements. Adler once said that organizations, something to the effect that organizations argue about bylaws when they've lost their purpose. So, have we lost our purpose? Have we just lost the consensus about our purpose? I think we have our purpose is pretty clear. I think our purpose is to offer people hungering for meaning, belonging, and justice, communities where they can support each other in nurturing goodness in the world. Full stop. I think that's our purpose. Nurturing this community that helps each other do that work. Now, I supported our national organization to bring that goal forward because I believe that it aligns with that purpose. When I was president of the Washington Ethical Society a couple of decades ago, I resisted strong currents back then pulling us away from our national organization. Because the AEU 20 years ago had fallen into real dysfunction. They weren't filing their tax paperwork, they weren't answering their phones. But I was the only board member at Washington to strongly advocate for remaining a member of our national organization. I'm glad we did. It began to function better. But now that we're here, I'm wondering, well, should we have left then? I don't think so, because I believe it aligns with our purpose. Since that time, when folks say, well, what does the AEU give ethical societies? I'll tell them they organize our national meetings, they link us to other national organizations, they publicize our movement and our values to the broader society. Most of all, I tell them about leadership training because I personally am so grateful to the American Ethical Union. I spent 4 years doing training and 2 years of internships under the guidance of the American Ethical Union, and that meant a lot to me. Now, there's plenty of room for discussion about the quality of the services that the AEU offers us. I think that's an open discussion. But I do believe the providing of leadership and the bringing our national community together is vastly more important to our future than a lot of us realize. Now, it's challenging to provide effective leadership to ethical societies, in part because they're so different in their size and in their nature. And it's also hard because leaders are often asked to wear many, many hats. I've talked about that here. Leaders are asked to be pastoral counselors, inspirational speakers, organizational administrators, writers, curators of ethical culture, philosophy, and history, social justice advocates in the greater society, and so on. Now, all that said, I do believe that should our national organization disappear overnight, I think most of the societies would continue on as they were, at least for the short term. We're a functioning group, we have resources and energy, so I'm not worried so much about that. But I do think over the long term, the lack of a collective conversation and the lack of the providing of leadership skills will hurt us. I think our pool has shrunk to the degree that now 3 of the largest ethical societies in the United States have leaders who also are Unitarian Universalist ministers because they have a large training program and a lot of candidates from UU circles. But I do think we need to perhaps rethink what we see leadership is, especially given the change that people have about what congregational life is like or should be like. How do we live our values? We have to rethink that. I also want to add that I'll admit I care less about our national organization than I do about the local societies doing that work, because they're in the trenches. And I have to say that I care less about our local societies in general than I care about the people and their daily effort to live an ethical life. The national society should serve our local societies, and those local societies should serve the people. And I think we have to get to that grassroots level of conversation. We're a part of ethical culture to try to make the world more ethical, where everybody is treated with inherent worth and where there's compassion and ethics guide us more than competition and profit. Our goal is to build institutions or movements not for the sake of building them. Our goal is to create opportunities for more ethical behavior and the respect for people to be acted on. These institutions, if they don't serve these goals, we need to reboot them, which was the point of this summer's American Ethical Union work. So, did it help us turn away from whatever dysfunctions may be holding us back towards a rejuvenated ethical culture? I think so. But believe me, it depends who you ask. So ask people who were involved this summer what they thought. Personally, I'm excited and I'm worried. My pessimism starts from a growing awareness of how much healing we need to do in our communities. I hugged one ethical culture leader who was working very hard in this and felt the grief and the heartache viscerally. This is not easy work, and when tensions rise, it can be very difficult to carry that weight. People have been hurt, usually unintentionally, from dysfunction or miscommunication, and this harm continues to reverberate, with some people simply walking away from ethical culture and others continuing patterns that are harmful. This in turn creates more harm, so there's this cycle. I think it's a little trite to say this, but I think there's a lot of truth in the statement, hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. That appeals to me perhaps because I'm steeped in Buddhist approaches to ethics that believes that most unethical behavior is due to suffering. I believe that in myself. Usually when I don't act ethically, it's because I'm hurting in some way. But this need to heal continues. As folks of color continue to face systemic racism, as opioids and poverty rips out the heart of rural America, as the climate whips up storms and the planet continues to heat, it sometimes feels like we don't have time to heal, right? We don't have time, there's work to be done. I've heard folks in ethical culture call for recent calls for healing. They call it self-absorbed navel-gazing. I get that. This sort of reminds me of the perspectives I saw in my New England roots. My tight-lipped father, ignoring his own wounds and putting his head down and dutifully getting work done. And there's a lot I admire about that sense of duty. But my dad died of a heart attack at 57. Now, would addressing his personal wounds have delayed or prevented that? Maybe, I don't know. But I know I've given myself more room for self-care recently, especially given some hereditary heart health conditions. I've questioned whether self-care is a priority, as I know some of you have. Because it's easy to dismiss self-care when others in the world are suffering so profoundly from a basic lack of resources, food, housing. And I've benefited as much as anyone from privilege. I've lived a comfortable life. So shouldn't I focus on those more hurting? It'll surprise a few of you to know that that's a question I ask myself in my racial justice work, in my writing my 400 Years Today blog, or in a trip I took this summer to Alabama and Georgia to visit civil rights sites. I've reinvested a lot of personal energy into my anti-racism work, and I'll share more about that in a talk next month. But it leads me to ask, how much should I worry about my own heartache, given that work? And that question's alive in ethical culture. We're asking ourselves in the national movement, how do we deal with racial trauma? Everyone's different. But folks from historically marginalized groups have consistently told me that they've had difficult times in ethical culture. For BIPOC and LGBTQI plus folks who already carry the weight of oppression or stigmatization in general society, to come to an ethical culture society and not feel welcome and feel unappreciated or misunderstood weighs heavily. And they talk about these negative experiences. Ethical culture has always been about empowering the most marginalized in the world. When Adler came to New York, he saw the workers of that city being mistreated, and he focused on them. They were in his backyard. Restorative practices can help address this reality, and how it includes my own heartache is still something to be figured out. How do I, as a male, cisgendered, heterosexual, financially and socially privileged person, heal while centering for more systemically oppressed groups? That's the work in front of me, I feel. All of this work has to acknowledge the systems and habits of oppression. We have to look out for patriarchal processes and behaviors that sustain inequality. And we have to find processes for dealing with the harm and for assuring a safe and nurturing national community for all members and lay leaders and staff. We have to engender trust on the national level, because it's been eroded. How do we construct ethical processes for holding compassionately those in leadership position accountable for their actions? It all involves interpersonal work, relational work. That's where I think we have to go most of all. It could help us bring out the best in others and thus in ourselves. Because when you hold ethical relationships as central, I think we can balance a whole bunch of competing energies in our movement. We have a need for organizational efficiency, but we also have a need for welcoming inclusion. We try to do that, for example, in a lot of our meetings. We have go-rounds at the beginning where we ask each person, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I always want to jump into the task management. But if you don't deal with the relational reality of the people working on the tasks, the work can go off the rails. So there's an art in this balance. Healthy relationships can help us find balances between taking into account the needs of large ethical societies and small ethical societies and societies in between like us. Good relations can help us balance the voices of professional leaders with the voices of lay leaders and general membership. All voices need to be heard. We have to balance established leadership, those who've been in the ethical movement for decades, with those who have joined recently. We need both continuity and novelty in trying to stir our future up. The AEU has the opportunity to do this because one of the bylaw changes at the July 29th meeting, I think actually the only one that passed, expanded the AEU board to include one member from every ethical society, so it's going from about 9 members to about 25. So that's going to be a new challenge, because it's not easy to manage a 25-person board. But it will offer us, I hope, a real mix of experience and new perspectives that we have to get. We can't keep doing things as we have for the last 50 years. This is hard work, but I'm optimistic because the AEU business meeting also voted in 4 leaders into AEU officer positions. And it's the most diverse in terms of age and race ever in the American Ethical Union. I hope you get to know Condra Sears, our new president. I hope you get to know Jay Hooper, our vice president, our new secretary, Anya Overman, and our treasurer, Liz Singer. Now, while Liz is an experienced AEU officer of my generation, Jay and Anya and Condra are all of my children's generation. This fresh energy and perspectives, I hope, will contribute to reversing a half-century of decline. The new board is focusing early on diversity, inclusion, justice, and equity. That's a big focus. I know some people love it and some people are reluctant to go that direction. Diversity is about making sure that our doors are wide open so that the most amount of folks from different backgrounds come and check us out. It's opening the doors. A commitment to inclusion, however, is more than that, because it includes welcome and celebration. I mean, it's one thing to throw your doors open and have people come here and then say, now this is how you have to behave and act. It's inclusion and welcome says, welcome, this is what we're about. How do you express those values? How do you live the values that we try to share here? So there's a basis of agreement, but the way they play out are varied. And I hope we can be more curious on the national level as to how those expressions come out. Now, much of our history has been based on justice, particularly the civil rights movement has been the heart and soul of ethical culture for many, many years, because it emphasizes on equality. Equality before the law. Equity, however, is a higher bar, because equity demands that you take into account historical or particular disadvantages suffered by people. So it's one reason why the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, because when it comes to fundamental social goods, our country was saying everybody should be able to have access. You don't all come up the same stairs, you get a ramp in the back of your building so that everybody can get in this building. And those challenges will continue to be in front of us as we try to become more committed to equity nationally. This work all has to be done within a relational package. Talking to each other, getting to know each other, being respectful, caring, candid, constructive. And I'm heartened by the new board's commitment to this work because it's how healing happens. And it's how we change structures so that harm doesn't occur in the future. And it helps us become more relevant to the outside world. So, whither goes ethical culture? I'm not sure, but I'm ready to support the new AEU board and its commitment to diversity, inclusion, justice, equity, so we can have a flourishing future. One of the things that animates so many people in ethical culture I know is we have a long history. And we've had a mission from the beginning that is continuing on, struggling to make its way into the future. So I'm going to end today with some words that Felix Adler offered at the 55th anniversary of the founding of ethical culture, just a year before he died. And it's like he's speaking to us, and I just want to evoke that sense of continuity. He said, "In closing, I turn to the future, to those to whom we commit our trust, to our unknown successors in the generations and generations." That's us. Across the gulf of years, I send them my greeting. Hey, Felix. In the hope that long after my voice has been stilled, an echo of what has been said here on this anniversary day will reach them, urging them to carry on, so as to bring nearer the day when the sublime vision, which hitherto has been seen but faintly and intermittently, shall shed its full radiance on on a transfigured humanity. Thank you for being involved in this work with me.
Thank you, Hugh. And Hugh will stick around after the announcements for anyone who wants to come forward a little bit and have some talk back. Now Rollin will play a second piece. Rollin. Thank you, Rollin. We rely on the support of our friends and members. Please mail your contribution to the Ethical Society or by clicking on the donate button at the bottom of our website. Thank you for your support.